Hey, this is Paris. I hope you enjoyed the Data Vampire series that we did back in October. It's had a fantastic response. And for that series, I spoke to a bunch of experts, and now we're releasing the full-length versions of those interviews for our supporters over on patreon.com. And I wanted to give you a preview of what those interviews sound like, so you can consider whether to go to patreon.com/techwon'tsaveus, become a supporter yourself, so you can learn even more about the important topics that we dug into in that special series. So enjoy this clip from my interview with Alex Hanna. Why are these generative AI models so computationally intensive?
Yeah, so they're computationally intensive because they are so large, and the process of training is a pretty computationally intensive process. So depends on how far you want to go back, but if you go back to the original innovation of neural networks and the kind of advent of backpropagation is just a really intensive process because you have this architecture. And when I say architecture, it's the kind of actual structure of the neural network. And there's a few that are more or less popular. It depends on, the latest and greatest large language model, has a certain kind of architecture, and it differs, like I can't imagine there's a lot of daylight between the cutting edge models at OpenAI versus Anthropic versus Google. Maybe there's some kind of differentiations that they have. But at the end of the day, the actual parameter fitting, the actual training process requires this goes through this process of backpropagation to actually have the weights on all the neurons. And so so in that case, backprop is just basically huge matrix multiplication operations. And this is why GPUs have taken off as a sort of specialized hardware that works really well for this. So NVIDIA, who, been making these things primarily for graphics, then, when AI has taken off, now NVIDIA has, this huge market cap, although it's going down now as the the bubble is starting to deflate. And so NVIDIA, has just been making so much bank selling these GPUs for training. So you're just doing massive distributed matrix multiplication across, hundreds of thousands of these H100 chips. And so that just makes it incredibly intensive computationally and with power. That's the main thing that it's attributed to training. But then there's also the kind of power that it takes when it comes to inference and actually doing prediction. I mean, you still have to draw upon all those weights and then do all the multiplication of, whatever the data input is. Marginally, that is a lot less, but over, cumulatively, that takes a shit ton of computation and power. Those are the two dimensions. We talk a lot about training, but the inference, just like getting a bunch of users is also intensive computationally and resource-wise.
Yeah, so I guess the focus was initially, especially as these things were rolling out, much more on the training and, how much went into kind of creating these models in the first place. But as the tools have proliferated, whether it is, from OpenAI popularizing ChatGPT or Google like sticking Gemini in all these different applications, then there's a lot of like computationally intensive tasks that come from that as well, especially because you have so many people using these things.
Yeah, that's right. And, Google had been very optimistic about this on the outset. I mean, there had been the kind of paper that Google had written that had David Patterson as the lead author, and it had some kind of ridiculous title that was like, the cost of large language models will increase then plateau or something of that nature. And they really had this kind of vision. I mean, it made a lot of very strong assumptions in that paper. I mean, one of them being that you could kind of optimize for training these things where, you had almost all green energy, or you could train them in off hours. But the huge error there was the focus on the marginal cost of training, maybe a single or a class of models, and then doing kind of inference rather than seeing that these things are just popping up everywhere and training is what's going to happen. The training cost is going to be the huge cost from the beginning, and it's going to put the most stress on the power grid But if you have these things continuing to do inference, and if you want to actually grow your user base, then yeah, you're going to have 100 different models doing inference. And, if you're OpenAI and you say that, I don't know how many active users they have right now. They bragged that they had 100 million active users a month after ChatGPT came out, even though I'm sure that's precipitously dropped, because people are like, okay, this thing was fun to play with and now I don't give a shit. But, if you still have kind of a class of models, especially as they're trying to do a big push for enterprise sales and they're being foisted on people in ways that where they can't opt out, then yeah, I mean, then you're not going to get that marginal cost is going to really add up.
If you found that clip intriguing, go to patreon.com/techwon'tsave us, where you can become a supporter, support the work that goes into making the show, and get the full-length version of that interview. Thanks so much.